My sister slapped me across the face in front of 180 guests at her wedding, all because I wouldn't give her my penthouse. What she didn't know was that a senior judge had been watching the entire thing. It all began at the extravagant Bella Vista Grand in downtown Chicago. My family had pressured me into handing over my apartment to my younger sister, Delaney, and her brand new husband. Mom told me flatly, "Self-centered people don't deserve nice things." Dad added coldly, "Her babies need a real home." And Delaney? She just smirked, like she'd finally knocked me off the pedestal I apparently didn't deserve. When I refused, she didn't argue. She struck. Hard. Right there in the middle of her reception, in front of everyone. They laughed. And I didn't cry. I picked a different kind of justice. One that would crush their egos permanently. The champagne flute trembled slightly in my palm as Delaney floated across the ballroom floor in a custom Leighton Mayfield gown, the silk trailing behind her like liquid moonlight. 180 people had gathered to watch her, modern fairy tale, wedding to Aiden, a high-profile financial consultant she'd been dating for just under 9 months. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was marrying for status while demanding my hard-earned lifestyle. I'm Camille. 33. I've clawed my way to where I am, no shortcuts, no handouts. While Delaney played musical chairs with boyfriends through her 20s, I buried myself in law school and pulled 80-hour weeks at a boutique litigation firm in Brooklyn. 4 years ago, I gambled everything to start my own practice focused on corporate disputes. It paid off big. Last year, I won a settlement that let me buy my dream penthouse in Lincoln Park, a place I'd fantasized about since I was 19. A view, a terrace, a walk-in closet, mine. Or so I thought. "Camille, darling, you look luminous," Mom chirped as she approached, her face pulled tight in a forced smile. She wore a charcoal velvet dress that easily cost $4,000, her blonde bob styled to sharp perfection. That look, the one that always meant she wanted something, made my stomach twist. "We need to chat. Family stuff." "Mom, not now," I said. "It's Delaney's wedding. Can't this wait?" "Actually, no," Dad chimed in, suddenly behind her. At 59, he still wore his authority like a second skin, his tux fitting snug over a frame that commanded attention. His eyes, though, held that familiar cold disappointment, like I'd just ruined Thanksgiving again. "It's about your living situation." I nearly laughed. "My living situation?" I asked, setting down my drink. Mom leaned in, voice syrupy. "Delaney and Aiden need space. That one-bedroom rental of his isn't ideal for a growing family. They're not even expecting," I said flatly. "But we will be soon." Delaney's voice sang out as she arrived, Aiden glued to her hip. She looked radiant and calculated, green eyes cool as glass. "Congratulations," I said carefully. "I'm sure you'll find something wonderful." "We already have," she said, smile bright enough to blind. "Your penthouse." I blinked. "Excuse me?" Dad jumped in, voice feigning logic. "You're single, Camille. Do you really need 3 bedrooms? You're asking me to give up my home?" "Not give," Mom corrected. "Trade. Aiden's studio in Evanston is more than enough for one. You want me to swap my 2,800 square foot penthouse for a studio with no washer and dryer?" I asked. "Stop being dramatic." Delaney rolled her eyes. "You barely even use the space. You don't even have a boyfriend." That one hit where it was meant to. Delaney had always been the favorite. When she dropped out of college to travel and grow, they called her brave. When I graduated top of my class, they said I'd miss out on life. They celebrated her boyfriends, pitted my ambition. "I need those rooms because it's my home," I said, voice rising. "I earned it. Paid for it. And I'm not giving it up." "Camille Rose Bennett," Mom snapped. "You're being selfish. Family comes first." "Really? Since when?" I laughed bitterly. "When I studied for the bar alone? When I'd built my business from scratch while you called me reckless? When I made partner and you said I was too intense?" Delaney's eyes narrowed. You've always hated me for being loved more. I don't hate you, I said. I pity you. That was the match. She surged forward, lips curled. I'm the better daughter. The prettier one. The one who makes them proud. I deserve the life you're hogging. The words barely landed before she raised her hand and slapped me. The snap echoed. 180 guests fell silent. And then they laughed. I stood frozen as they whispered, pointed, muttered. My cheek throbbed. My pride seethed. But I didn't cry. I reached into my clutch, pulled out my phone, and typed with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. What are you doing? Mom hissed. I hit send. And the quiet in the ballroom shifted. Because revenge wasn't loud. It was surgical. And I had just begun. The ballroom's laughter hadn't even finished echoing when the first phone buzzed. Then another. A ripple of sound and shifting glances followed. The tension was so sharp it could have sliced the fondant cake that loomed like a sugary monument behind Delaney's throne of a sweetheart table. Nobody knew yet what I had done. But they would. Very soon. Camille, what did you just send? Mom's voice was tight, trembling just under the surface like a taut violin string about to snap. I didn't answer her. I was watching Judge Naomi Leclerc, seated near the front, lower her champagne flute and slowly raise an eyebrow. She didn't need to speak. The expression on her face, half disgust, half amusement, told me she had read it. So had Elliot Feynman, managing editor at the Chicago Tribune. He was leaning toward his wife, whispering something as he scrolled through his phone. So had Callie Min, the VP of a major venture capital firm I had worked with last year. Her husband had just asked her to read it out loud. And then, the push notifications started pinging. BuzzFeed News. Twitter. A mid-tier wedding blogger I once represented posted a screenshot captioned, Penthouse slap drama at Bella Vista Grand. Lawyer Camille Bennett just exposed her entire family mid-reception. And we've got the receipts. Camille, please. Dad muttered now, his voice like gravel being crushed under pressure. You're embarrassing all of us. No, I said, turning to him. You embarrass yourselves. I just told the truth. Delaney lunged forward again, but Aiden pulled her back, not out of concern for me, but because he realized, far too late, the severity of what had just unfolded. He kept darting glances at the guests, the cameras, the judge. Damage control flickered in his brain like a dying neon light. What did you say? Delaney hissed through clenched teeth. I gave her my calmest smile yet. I let the city know that your golden child assaulted me in public after demanding my home. You're being dramatic, she shouted, but even her voice cracked now. You hit me, Delaney. In front of nearly 200 people. Some of whom practice law, some who enforce it, and some who report on it. Aiden stepped forward, sweating. Camille, please. We didn't mean for any of this to get out of hand. Maybe we can sit down and work something out. I turned toward him. You married into this circus. You'll figure out eventually that they don't want resolution. They want submission. What do you want? Mom asked, no longer indignant, just desperate. I want to never hear from you again, I replied. I want you to stop pretending blood entitles you to my life. I want you to understand that you don't own me. That was when Judge Leclerc stood up. Her voice rang clear, sharp, and judicial. I don't normally interject at social functions, but I must say, Miss Bennett, I admire your restraint. If someone had humiliated me like that in front of a federal judge, they'd be facing a lot more than a public relations disaster. Dead silence. Then someone clapped. Just once. Then again. Within seconds, half the room, especially the professionals, were clapping. The other half sat frozen, mortified. Delaney's sorority friends were stone-faced, clutching their designer clutches like shields. The photographer stopped snapping. The string quartet that had resumed during the chaos abruptly stopped mid-song again. Delaney's makeup, once airbrushed perfection, was starting to bleed under her eyes. She stepped backward, then forward, uncertain whether to scream or faint. But I didn't move. I wasn't done yet. You think this is just about the penthouse? I asked her. You think I'm just bitter and jealous and difficult? I've spent my whole life trying to earn love from people who only show up when I have something they can take. Then I turned toward the crowd. Let me ask you something, I said, raising my voice to the guests, the press, the legal elite. How many of you women here have ever been told that your success is selfish? That you should be smaller, quieter, more available to your family? That your hard work doesn't matter if you don't serve someone else's story? There were murmurs. Heads nodded. More phones came out. Delaney, now trembling, whispered, "Why are you doing this? You're ruining everything." "No," I said. "I'm finally telling it." And that's when the unexpected twist came. Aiden's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then looked up in confusion. "My firm's ethics committee just requested a statement from me," he mumbled. Another buzz. Then his best man's phone rang. He looked stunned. "Dude, this is on Reddit. Live. There's a post with almost 20,000 upvotes already." The spell was breaking. Not for me, for them. Delaney collapsed into a chair, shaking, mascara streaked like war paint down her cheeks. Aiden started dialing. My parents stood silent, as though frozen in place. Guests shuffled out, trying not to make eye contact. But I wasn't finished yet. I walked over to the mic. Yes, the mic. The one by the bandstand. One of the violinists actually said, "Go for it." And I did. "I was raised in a family that didn't see me unless they needed something," I said to the room. "They didn't support my dreams, but now they want the life I'd built. They called me selfish for keeping what I earned. But I'm done apologizing for my success. I'm not giving away my penthouse. I'm not giving away my peace. I'm done." Then I walked out. As the heavy ballroom doors closed behind me, the only sound I heard was my heels on the marble floor, and a single, stunned voice from inside whispering, "She's not coming back, is she?" No. I wasn't. The autumn wind hit me like a splash of cold truth as I stepped onto the front steps of the Bella Vista Grand, the door hissing closed behind me. I didn't look back. My face still stung where Delaney had slapped me. But it wasn't the pain that stayed with me. It was the look in her eyes, like she'd finally confirmed a lifelong suspicion that no matter what I did, I would always be second best in their story. Funny. I'd spent years pretending that wasn't true. I took a long breath and turned the corner, needing to walk. To move. To keep the rage from calcifying into grief. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was still too high on the adrenaline of finally standing up for myself. But the thing about defiance? It always wakes up old ghosts. As I wandered aimlessly down 6th Avenue, a memory began to crawl its way up through the cracks in my mind, the kind of memory you don't invite, but shows up anyway. I was 16 the first time they told me I wasn't family enough. It was Thanksgiving. Our Aunt Cecily had died just a month before, and Mom decided to host the whole extended family. I'd baked a pecan pie from scratch, a tiny thing, but it felt important at the time. It sat on the edge of the dining table, barely noticed. At the dinner table, Delaney, 12 at the time, loud and luminous as always, was describing how she was definitely going to be an actress, and Dad was smiling like she'd solved world hunger. "Camille, what about you?" my aunt had asked. I opened my mouth to answer. "I think I want to be a lawyer." Before I could finish the sentence, Dad barked out a laugh. "Oh please, Camille. You hate arguing." Everyone chuckled. I flushed. Delaney, not missing a beat, said, "She's better at typing. She can be my assistant." Mom laughed. I remember just freezing, holding my fork, swallowing something that wasn't food. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the stairs and reread the letter I'd gotten that day, an early acceptance to a summer legal institute at Northwestern. Fully funded. I never told them. What was the point? I realized that night that their love wasn't unconditional. It was conditional on whether I could make them look good. That moment lived in me like a splinter I never quite pulled out. Every time I achieved something, a scholarship, an award, a promotion, it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a dare. Like I was asking for permission to be proud. And tonight? Tonight they dared me again. They demanded my home. They demanded my silence. They demanded I swallow my worth so my sister could appear to be more than she was. But something changed the moment Delaney slapped me. It wasn't just rage. It wasn't just humiliation. It was the release of a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough. And now? Now I knew I was. Halfway down the block, I checked my phone. Dozens of notifications. Messages from journalists, attorneys, clients, even a couple of my exes. But one name made me pause. Naomi Leclerc. The judge. She texted me. Camille. That was the bravest thing I've ever witnessed at a wedding. If you ever want a seat on the bench one day, I'll sponsor you myself. I stopped walking. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, unable to process the magnitude of those words. A woman who had inspired my career was offering to help me ascend higher. Not in spite of what happened tonight. Because of it. My family wanted to reduce me to nothing. Instead, they'd made me seen. Respected. Dangerous. And suddenly, I realized something else. I wasn't walking away empty-handed. They took my patience, yes. But I still had my power. I still had my name. And I still had my home. As I turned the corner toward the train station, I passed a small bridal store. In the window was a mannequin dressed in a lavish white gown, its veil caught in a gust of wind from the cracked open door. It fluttered, snagged on a hinge, and then tore with the sound of fabric giving up. I smiled. A fitting metaphor. Because Delaney's big day was unraveling faster than she could glue it back together. By the time I made it home, the city was glowing in that hazy, late-night way, streetlights humming, windows flickering with television light, taxis crawling like golden beetles down the avenues. My penthouse stood silent and radiant, a monument to every fight I'd won in silence. It felt like a sanctuary again. But the silence didn't last long. The moment I stepped inside, my phone started vibrating uncontrollably, texts, calls, pings from platforms I hadn't even checked in months. The video of the slap had now crossed 2 million views. That would have been enough to rattle anyone. But what really stopped me in my tracks wasn't the video. It was the thread. A Reddit thread. Corporate attorney slapped at sister's wedding for refusing to hand over her home. Update. The family has a history. The comments were relentless. So I did some digging. Her father's firm took a PPP loan during the pandemic for over $800K, but never reopened. The business address is now a UPS drop box. Delaney's boutique PR firm has 4 fake testimonials, all traced back to Fiverr accounts. They're grifters. Whole family. Except Camille. I scrolled in stunned silence as strangers unraveled secrets I'd either buried or never known. And then, there it was. A scanned document. Notarized. Dated 3 years ago. My parents had taken out a secondary mortgage on their house, and listed me as a co-signer. Without my consent. Without my signature. My breath caught. I ran to my file cabinet and yanked open the drawer where I kept old tax returns and estate forms. Nothing. No mention. No notification. Just gone. They had forged my name. They'd been stealing from me for years. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. The urgency to transfer the penthouse. The guilt tripping. The slap. This wasn't just about Delaney wanting my space. It was about covering tracks. Resetting their collapsing lives at my expense. They needed that apartment to remortgage it, sell it off quietly, or claim it as family property. This was never about babies or marriage. It was a desperate attempt to keep their financial collapse from being exposed. They hadn't just disrespected me. They had committed fraud. Aiden's ethics inquiry suddenly made a lot more sense. So did the new call that lit up my phone from a familiar number. Attorney General's Office, Fraud Division. I let it ring out. Then another number popped up. Blocked. I declined it. Then a text from Delaney appeared. Camille. You need to stop this. Please. You're going to ruin everything. She had no idea. She thought I was trying to get back at her for the slap. But that wasn't it at all. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability. And my parents? They weren't going to get a pass either. I sat down at my kitchen island, opened my laptop, and began typing out an email to my financial attorney. Subject line: urgent, possible mortgage fraud investigation. My finger hovered over the trackpad. A strange calm washed over me. When I was a child, I thought justice was someone else showing up for you. Now I knew better. Justice was when you showed up for yourself. And I was going to show up loud. I clicked send. Just as a headline appeared on my news feed. Slap heard round the ballroom. Chicago attorney speaks out about family betrayal, legal fallout coming. Underneath it was a stock photo of me entering the courthouse from a case 3 months earlier. It wasn't even the same day. But the world didn't care. This story had escaped my control. It was no longer just a family squabble. It was about ethics, abuse, power, and the wolves were circling. The next morning, as I stood at my window sipping black coffee, watching the city wake up, I made one last call before heading to work. Judge Leclerc picked up after one ring. Camille, she said without hesitation. Are you ready for what's coming? I think I am. Good, she said. Because I think you're going to be leading a conversation far bigger than you expected. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the glass, smudged from last night's tears, makeup half worn off, but eyes clear and ready. Let the storm come. I wasn't scared of being seen anymore. By the time the subpoenas landed on my parents' doorstep, I had already updated the locks on my penthouse, transferred all sensitive financial accounts, and hired a forensic accountant. There was no more room for grace. Not when I was finally staring the truth straight in the face. They had forged my name. They had stolen from me. And they had done it with smiles on their faces and entitlement in their voices, believing they'd never be caught because I'd always fold. Because I was family. But I wasn't theirs anymore. 3 weeks after the wedding, I found myself sitting across from a fraud investigator in a private conference room downtown. I handed over the documentation the internet had helped uncover, along with my signed statement. The agent raised an eyebrow. Your name's Camille Bennett? Yes. And your signature here? He pointed to the co-signed mortgage. Not mine. He nodded, slid the folder into a thick manila envelope, and locked eyes with me. We'll be in touch. They always say vengeance is about destruction. But this felt more like surgery. Precise, necessary. Cutting out something that had been killing me slowly. But what I didn't expect was how far this would go. The judge recused from the civil case that was now forming against my parents was replaced by a federal arbitrator, because the PPP loan violations and mortgage fraud crossed state lines. Turns out, my father had borrowed my tax ID to apply for one of the loans. He used my address as a business contact on the application. That's why they wanted the penthouse. They were preparing to flip it, or worse, use it as a leveraged asset. My mother, once the perfect country club wife, found herself testifying under oath. Delaney's job loss was just the beginning. Her marriage collapsed when Aiden discovered she had also emptied their joint savings into covering her parents' debts. And in the middle of all this chaos, my face was on Good Morning America. They invited me on to discuss success, boundaries, and surviving toxic families. I nearly declined. Then I remembered 16-year-old me, crying in the stairwell with a scholarship letter in hand, knowing she would never be seen for who she really was. So I went. And I spoke, not about revenge, but about recognition. I told them what Judge Leclerc had told me: abuse doesn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it leaves signatures forged, dreams dismissed, and love conditioned. And people listened. Not just thousands. Millions. My inbox filled with strangers thanking me for showing them they weren't alone. I got letters from women who had finally said no, from sons who refused to sign over inheritance money, from professionals who had walked away from toxic parents and never looked back. The world didn't just see me. It heard me. And in all of that noise, TV interviews, podcast requests, online debates, I found a strange, bittersweet silence inside myself. A peace I'd never known. I wasn't Camille the scapegoat anymore. I was Camille the attorney. Camille the survivor. Camille the woman who said, "No more." 6 months later, the case closed with an undisclosed settlement. My name was officially cleared. The forged mortgage was nullified. My parents were fined and barred from applying for any future government loans. They sent a letter. Not an apology, of course not. A request. To speak. To explain. To reconnect. I read it once. Then burned it. Delaney never called again. I heard from a friend that she moved back in with my parents after the divorce. That the town didn't welcome them like it used to. That she blamed me for everything. But I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need her to understand. Because I understood myself. And that had always been the battle. I renovated my penthouse. Painted the walls warm gold. Filled it with the smell of coffee, books, and laughter, mine, my friends, my chosen family. I turned the guest room into a sanctuary for people who needed space. The home they said I didn't need became the one place where I could truly breathe. And sometimes, at night, I'd look out over the city, glass in hand, and feel nothing but gratitude for the woman I'd become. Because in the end, the revenge wasn't ruining them. It was reclaiming me.